A couple of days ago, in this video over here, I provided a response to what is commonly known as the Christopher Hitchens wager. So, to summarize, the wager is all about this, that no believer can make a statement or perform a moral action, a good action, that no unbeliever can perform. So essentially, the whole case is that probably from the unbeliever standpoint, there would be moral actions or statements, things that can actually be moral in themselves, that the unbeliever probably can make according to whatever morality that morality or system that atheism has, that an atheist will be able to do, but a Christian would not be able to do. I think that's the gotcha that he's trying to do with that. Whereas a believer, even on a believer's worldview, cannot make an action or a moral claim that only believers can make. So I argued in the video I made from the transcendental standpoint that that is just not the case. If you take even the very concept of being a believer in a true idea or concept of God seriously, and as I expected, I got a bit of backlash from the atheistic community. So today in this video, I'm going to provide a brush up on that response and argue the case from a more classical perspective while still keeping my transcendental tone to it. Now, if anyone is familiar with Christopher Hitchens and his background, his style, his methodology in debating or providing a critique of religious systems and stuff like that, it is a common assertion that he makes that people, while being believers, cannot name a moral action or statement undertaken that a non-believer likewise cannot perform or fulfill. And now, you would hear common answers on this standpoint, and I believe all sorts of religious people give sufficient response to Hitchens on that particular standpoint. And the common response is quite obvious, that if God exists, the first and greatest commandment would be to love and obey and submit to your Creator, and that objectively is a moral action that clearly a non-believer in the true God cannot perform. And the problem is this: they do not want to actually take the assertion seriously. Wherefore, we're saying, if God, in the true sense, exists, then it is He who determines whether something is right or wrong. And there is nothing the creature can do. There is nothing the creature can do to revile against its creator that will make any meaningful sense. Literally, that would be if you created a gaming universe, you made the rules. And no matter how the figures in there would want to pervert the system or try to revile against the system, it wouldn't change the fact that you're the creator of the environment and the reality, the virtual reality, and you're the one who has the right to make the rules, and you're the one who has the right to hold people accountable to your rules. It's just the fact. You can't escape this reality. The only way you can is to disprove that God exists, show that God does not exist. So that's the only way morality would no longer be grounded in God if there is no God. And the flip side is that if there is no God, then there is no objective standard for morality. Again, it is very possible, at least in theory, that an action on atheism will be equally moral and immoral to two different people. It's just the reality that they have to accept, and they know that. They can't substantiate why that would not be the case. They would say all this kind of stuff, like, oh, society stipulates values. So society has stipulated the opposite. They put the opposite goal there. And society says, yes, little people deserve to be eaten. Does that make it right? Has it always been wrong for people to eat little people? Has it always been wrong? If it's always been wrong, according to what standard? According to what authority? Has it always been wrong? Again, we know that it's always been wrong, which is demonstrating what Paul, in fact, has said in Romans chapter 1, that the invisible attributes of God have been made known to the things he has made, so that everybody is without excuse, because the law has been written on our hearts. We are made in the image of God. That is the reason why we know such things are wrong and such a thing is right, because God, in his own unchanging moral character, endowed us in his image and wrote this on our makeup. And we are aware. The problem is that we are now evil, and we're rebelling against that source, even at the same time keeping with, let's say, some of the statements or actions that are made. We are not really doing moral actions because of we're rebelling against the source, which I don't see why, from answering from a believer standpoint, which is what Christopher Hitchens asked. He asked that name as a believer a moral statement or claim or action that a non-believer can do. And as a believer, the answer is there is none that a non-believer can actually do, because the very basis for morality has been wiped off the floor. And if God truly exists, then there is no action that he will make that would actually count as righteousness, because in the reality of God actually existing. Let's calm down and think about it. If God exists, then he's the one who writes the rules. And whatever I might think or want doesn't matter because he's God. He has the right to do whatever he wants if he is in fact God. So I don't see why they couldn't get the answer down the barrel. But before we go further, I would like to at least provide his actual statement again so that you all would understand where I'm coming from. Oops, there we go. My light just failed on me. But that no matter, we'll continue anyway. So, yeah, essentially, the idea is that a believer cannot mention, while being a believer, the ethical or moral statement that an unbeliever cannot say or actually fulfill. And as I said earlier, it is a common strategy or wager that is put up by Christopher Hitchens during his time of engaging with non-believers. Now, the thing is this. I don't think that atheists, not just they weren't able to understand the response that I gave, they haven't even taken it to the proper, thoughtful conclusion, the very wager that was set forth by Christopher Hitchens, because if they did so, the response that I gave should be obvious that that is the case. But for the sake of academic, let's put his wager once again in view so that we would know what we are responding to.
I have a moral challenge on this point. Answer me this if you think that morality comes from the supernatural and we require celestial dictatorship permission for it. Name me a moral action committed by a believer or a moral statement or ethical statement uttered by one that could not be made or uttered by an unbeliever. I've asked this in a number of venues and forums now. I'm going to keep on asking you. I've not yet had an answer. If I was to ask anyone in this room, however, could they name a wicked action performed or a vile statement made by someone attributable only to their religious faith, there isn't a single person here who would have to hesitate for a second.
And there you go. So that is the whole claim that one, there is not a single moral action or statement wherewith a believer would say that only a believer in a particular religion, given the religion to be the true religion, can make or do, and a non-believer cannot. And then there exist vile actions, things that are considered as immoral, that would be attributed not just to the consistent practice of one religious faith, but any religious faith. So there's even a backside on it, like I pointed out earlier. And that's not even the exact video that I used to make the first response to show that this was his style, this was his tactic. So let's get back to the one that I used, which was his debate with William Lane Craig, and see what was even William Lane Craig's response to that particular assertion. For background information, the one I just played now was his debate with John Lennox. So let's see the one that I originally used from Craig.
To those who say that without God there can be no morality, you are to ask yourself two questions. You were to name a moral action undertaken, or a moral and ethical statement made by a believer. I dare say you can do it. You are then to say that you can not imagine a non-believer making this moral statement or undertaking this moral action. Can you think? Can you now think? Can any of you think? Don't have to answer now. You have all night, and you have my email. And I've done this with everyone from the Archbishop of Canterbury to even lower people. You name me the ethical and moral action or statement that a believer can make and an unbeliever cannot, and there's a prize. I'll tell you about that later. Now there's a second question. Think of something wicked that only a believer would be likely to do, or something wicked that only a believer would be likely to say. You've already thought of it. The suicide bombing community is entirely religious. The genital mutilation community is entirely religious. I wouldn't say that the child abuse community is entirely religious. I wouldn't. But it's bidding to be entirely religious. It operates on the old Latin slogan, "No child's behind left." How dare anybody, how dare anyone who speaks for religion say of us, the secular and the non-believers, that we are the immoral ones? It is itself a wicked thing to say. Itself an absolutely indefensible thing to say. No, the decapitation on the bus is going to be done by someone who thinks God is telling him to do it.
And there you go. That's his entire framework, and used two different occasions. Once with John Lennox, the other time with William Lane Craig. So I would help but notice there is this passion in his voice when he's trying to show why believing in such a thing as Almighty God is so wrong and even to some extent vile. which kind of vile nature was in the supporters of him in my comment section in my response. So he says that one believer cannot mention a moral action or moral claim that the unbeliever cannot possibly do. Whereas there's always going to be one on the other side. The flip side is that there is always something vile and immoral that somebody in the name of believing in God could do. Whereas an atheist could never do such a thing. People like Hitler and Stalin and all these people, I don't know whether he puts them in view when he says such a thing, but there we go, that's his wager. Now, the hidden presupposition in all this is that there is this overarching standard that names something to be moral or immoral, whether a person is in the Christian worldview, Buddhist worldview, Muslim worldview, or atheistic worldview. So there's this overarching standard of morality. I just do not see how on atheism that such a thing could exist, because it's subjective anyways. And it's the kind of thing that you would expect even in the response that William Lane Craig ended up giving. Now, I'm not a supporter of William Lane Craig in all things by any means. There are some things that I would strongly disagree with him on. But in his response to this particular question, I think he got it nailed on. And I believe most Christians have been able to give a similar response, though I'm going to take that a step further. Let's see what he had to say. Well, first off, before we go to see the response from Bill Craig, there is a big difference between just saying a moral statement or performing a moral action and the action actually being moral, or the statement being true in the moral sense. Because of, is it not possible that a person could just outwardly say a moral statement like, well, it is a good thing to help the blind cross the street? An atheist can say that, but to, in the true sense, believe that in their heart is a completely different question. Or being able to perform the actual action of helping somebody cross the street who is blind, just outwardly performing that action and the thought and intent of your heart is a completely different standpoint. If somebody was like saying the statement just to get approval from other people so that other people will think he's a good person, would that count as an actual moral statement? Wouldn't that just count as pride? Obviously. Or if somebody is performing the action so that other people will look at him to be this beacon of morality, wouldn't that just count as pride? Is he doing this for the sake of goodness? Is he doing this because of it's the right thing to do, or is he doing this so that he will just be seen and looked upon as a righteous person outwardly? Is that not the case? Are we just talking about what just passes to the eye is all that is the case with morality? Of course, with atheism, I don't think you can get any deeper than what passes to the eye. So if that's the situation, then obviously Hitchens' wager is there, because he knows that's not what morality is all about. Morality is about the thoughts and intent of the person. We use the statement even all the time. It's the thought that counts. The thought that counts. Somebody gets you a gift that is not necessarily what you like, but what you say, it's the thought that counts, because that's the case. So, except you sever moral action and moral statements from the thoughts and intents of the person who is doing this, my point still stands. But let's get into the rest of the video.
Now, Mr. Hitchens says, name one moral action that an unbeliever could not take. Well, that's trivially easy. If God exists, there are all kinds of moral duties that we have that the unbeliever could not recognize. At the panel discussion last week in Dallas, when Mr. Hitchens demanded that someone name such an action, a pastor on the panel immediately piped up, how about tithing? Well, leave it to a pastor to think of that, but clearly that's an action that only a believer would take. Even more fundamentally, what about the first and greatest commandment? You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your strength, with all your mind. That is an action that only a believer can take. No unbeliever can discharge even this most fundamental of moral duties.
And there you go. That's exactly where I'm coming from. If God exists, that is the fundamental assertion that I don't see why people from Christopher Hitchens' point of view just don't want to allow to settle and actually ponder about it. Because if they do for even a second, the answer would become clear. If God exists, I mean God in the fundamental sense, I'm not talking about people asserting some form of demiurges or different kinds of higher powers or equality of higher powers, that kind of thing. I'm talking about the true classical concept of God, a sovereign, omnipotent creator who created all things for himself, to himself. And he's the one who ordains whatever comes to pass. He's the one who is in charge of whatever comes to pass. He's the one who made creatures for his own pleasure. If such a being exists, automatically he's the one who makes the rules. Automatically. There cannot be a higher standard or a higher power or authority over him. If not, he would cease to be God. It's part of the very definition of God to be sovereign. And you have to be sovereign in everything, in morality as well. You might not like that. You might not like the fact that if God exists, he is the one who determines what is right or what is wrong or what is good or what is evil. But it's not going to change the fact. Same way it wouldn't change the fact from the other way around. If there is no God, my asserting that there is a God who wants such a thing to be done or not to be done wouldn't be true, no matter how much I assert it. Although I could make a very clear argument that there is no reason why I should exist if there is no God, because if there ever was a time that there was nothing, there should be nothing now, that kind of thing. The great miracle of atheism. But that aside, let's go for the sake of argument. Think about it. If God exists, by definition of who he is the one who determines what is right and what is wrong. And he has determined the first and greatest commandment. The first commandment, wherewith every commandment is built up. Loving your neighbor as you love yourself. That kind of commandment that the unbelievers, they hold that one. I don't see how consistently they hold it on. But the golden rule, do unto others as you want them to do unto you, and stuff like that. It stems from what? First and greatest commandment, love God. Love your creator with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. With every single thing in you, you are to love the one who made you and gave you the gift of life. If he exists, for you to be in rebellion against him automatically makes every single thing you do evil. If he exists, he has the right to call it evil. He is the one who determines something to be good or evil, because there can't be any moral standard above him. That's just the fundamental reality that you have to accept. The only thing you can do is to disprove whether he does exist, which should be easy if you're coming from that standpoint. If he doesn't exist, it should be easy to disprove that. But as long as you take that concept seriously, there's no way you could possibly say that someone who does not believe in God, if he truly is God, will do anything that is morally right in his sight. Because yes, that's the case. Something being right or wrong objectively. Now, as a matter of opinions, the other matter of this group of people said that we like that to be right, or this other group of people said they would like that to be right. It's the kind of thing I was getting in my comment section most of the time. Oh, morals is all about when we stipulate our goals and we have these goals that we wish to achieve, and maybe eating everybody would not allow us to achieve that goal, that kind of stuff. No, because again, there will be a time that society will swing their goals in the exact opposite direction. And what do you do then? So such things will now be right in that situation. I have had many of them go and just tell me yes. And that's the flaw. If the exact same moral issue would be moral and immoral just based on what society and what the people like, that's not really objective morality. You can call it morality, but it's not the case. So with the situation now, God, a being who cannot change, a being who is absolutely perfect, a being who created all things from nothing and has the ability and the right and authority to do whatsoever he pleases, automatically he writes the rules. And the ones who don't believe in him are always breaking the rules. That's just a fact, because the only ground for absolute morality, where we can say such a moral situation, such a moral action is always right, such a moral action is always wrong, no matter who is doing it, no matter who agrees or disagrees, the only way we can ground that is in the changeless nature of God, the creator, who has determined it to be so. And he created human beings in his image and put that law in their minds. That's why we know. Not we're trying to think about it, not we're just trying to postulate or stipulate what might be right or wrong in that case. We are certain, with absolute certainty, that the trafficking of human beings, the kidnapping of human beings is wrong. The raping of human beings is wrong. We are absolutely certain of those things because of he made us in his image and we endowed us with his own moral will. So now, to accept that while denying its source would then mean even the outward conformity to that would be counted as unrighteousness, not real righteousness, because I think any serious-minded person would have to accept that. Do you think that just the outward statement is what counts? If somebody is making what Christopher Hitchens said, an ethical moral statement, saying it with his mouth doesn't mean it with his heart. Would that count as truly moral? If somebody is performing an ethical moral action, whereas the intentions of his heart and thoughts are perverse. Will that really, again, who is the judge of what will make that moral or immoral? The people, the person himself? That makes no sense. It will just be the very reasons for why that would be moral would be the exact same reasons for why it would be immoral in another person's case, and it's just completely arbitrary because everybody's just different. But if God exists, the Creator, we ground it in His being, who declared for His creatures, "I don't like this. This is wrong. I don't like that. This is wrong. I like this. This is right." Then, regardless of what the creatures would think or want, it would always be the case whether something is right or something is wrong. And God has not just the ability to declare that, not just the right to declare that, He has the ability and the right to hold people accountable to that. Which is why in Christianity or any religion that takes a true concept of God seriously, one of the biggest parts of it is Judgment Day. There's going to be a day of reckoning where God will call into action every secret thing that was done. And we will all stand before God, and in the true sense, stand before the judgment seat of Jesus Christ and give an account for what we did in the body in that day. So, to say that an ethical or moral statement cannot be made by an unbeliever is just the necessary conclusion of believing in God. And then, notice what he said. I'm very sure that most of you do not even understand what Hitchens said. He said, as a believer of a certain God or a certain religion, or in saying that there is a true God in any sense, to say that as a believer, a non-believer can fulfill a moral or righteous action just as you can is to fundamentally deny or misunderstand the very concept of being a believer. If you're really being consistent with your faith, you can make such a statement. It's just untrue. If your faith is true, then that is automatically false. It's so obvious, which is, and on the flip side, if there is no God, that kind of a statement or claim can be made. And if there is no God, there is no actual unchanging morality. Because what if society says that it is necessary for their goal that one thing be right, then that will be right then. And the contrary to that will be wrong. Society stipulates the opposite goal, and then that thing that was right becomes wrong. What can we do with that? Just don't see why they can't actually take this claim seriously. So the last thing we're going to do is to try and look at a couple of comments that were made in the previous video and see whether we could provide a response to them here. Okay, so the first, the latest comment we see is morality was written down long before the Bible was written. Christians do not have a monopoly on morality. See, like I said, questions that stem from a fundamental misunderstanding of what I said and what Hitchens said. Hitchens said, a believer, as a consistent believer, can you name the ethical or moral claim that can be made by a believer but cannot be made by a non-believer? Which, again, according to Christianity, was 1 John 2:29. You know that he is righteous. You know that God is righteous, and everyone who does righteousness has been born of God. It is not possible to do righteousness as a believer and to not have been born of God. Why? Because what? What's the very definition of righteousness? According to any believer in God, what pleases God? That's what defines righteousness, not what pleases man, not what society postulates or stipulates as their goal or whatever. What pleases God and what pleases God alone is what defines whether something is moral or immoral, and that's the only way you can have an unchanging moral standard. You may not like that, but as long as we accept that it is possible that somebody created us, that automatically becomes what is moral or immoral. The only way to deny that is to disprove that nobody made us, which the floor is open to any of you who would want to do that. So next statement here was that, so before the Bible, there was no such thing as morals. Nope, I didn't say that. No laws against murder, rape, or theft. It's one thing to buy a load of bologna, but to argue for that society before Christ had no morals is beyond stupid. Like I said, just get vile in the comment sections. The very concept of society stipulates observing a moral standard. It's exactly what I said, arbitrary. So society stipulates this, that becomes moral. Society stipulates the opposite, that becomes also moral. It doesn't make any sense. Which means that morals existed 1,000 years before Christ. Read the whole Bible. It's about amoral. It's about as immoral as it gets. That's probably what he meant to say. I don't see how he'll be able to make that claim, but just even look at the things that I particularly answered. It might say that Christ is God, that humans are made in the image of God, and he wrote his laws on the hearts and minds of everyone. So we all know inherently what he would have us do as our creator. And being a consistent God, he revealed in the scriptures over time. What he revealed in the scriptures over time was the same as what he encoded into our makeup. And he came, of course, somebody came again to put a couple of statements there. Again, calling me brainwashed and that kind of stuff. And you could go to the comment section and read the rest of that conversation yourself. So it says, okay, sorry, no, your argument presupposes many things that are not only unsubstantiated. I don't see how it wasn't unsubstantiated, but they are unsubstantiable, that it can't even be defended, he's saying. This book says that everyone who does good comes from God is not an argument. Again, that's not what I was saying. And again, he fundamentally misunderstood what I said and what Hitchens said. Hitchens asked, as a believer, can you name the ethical or moral statement that an unbeliever cannot make? As a believer, what is ethical and moral is what? What pleases God. Again, you're not even supposed to abandon your worldview when you're answering questions from opposing worldviews. The atheists don't do that, but they demand the Christians to do that. But in this situation, Hitchens did not even ask the Christian to do that. He said, as a Christian, you think about it. As a believer, think about this. So what was wrong with the answer that I gave? He says Hitchens would have ripped me apart faster than even he can. I don't think he or Hitchens could actually demonstrate what I said was wrong. He said, you cannot demonstrate that God is righteous in the same way you can't show he is not. The argument is a non-starter. So then again, if God exists, there would be a standard of righteousness and morality above God. But then he's not really God because he's not sovereign. He's not the one totally in charge. If he is God, automatically he writes the rules. If he writes the rules, that means what he says is what's righteous, not what he doesn't say. Again, what can we say? And then again, another one. You presume that God is good. Go away. Again, exactly the kind of response you get from these people. They just decide in this kind of situation to emote rather than to think. If God exists, God automatically is good. If he's not good, he's not God. It is simply what you must affirm if you want to deal with this question with any seriousness. And of course, a personal attack. Learn how to speak. I don't know. I'm not as eloquent as Christopher Hitchens by any means, but it doesn't take somebody that can speak as fluently to tell that an argument is falling flat on its face. So that's that. That's the conclusion of the matter. If God exists, then God is the one who determines what is right or wrong. God has determined that everyone who does righteousness has been born of God. So, and that's the answer to the question. As a believer, can an atheist or a non-believer make a moral claim or do a moral action? Not just, again, like I said, Hitchens said one. I'm saying none. If I'm being consistent as a believer, there is no moral or ethical statement that can be made, given the fact that God exists or God created you. While you're in rebellion against God, that would possibly fly. I don't see how people can't necessarily get this. And instead of trying to reason what I was actually saying, they end up going into personal attacks. But what can we say? What does Proverbs say? The righteous man is an abomination to the wicked man. Wicked man, abomination to the righteous man. So that's that. So let's end today with a Bible verse. What shall we say? This from Ecclesiastes will definitely conclude us for today. Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep his commandments. For this is the whole duty of man. For God will bring every work into judgment, every secret thing, whether it be good or whether it be evil. So that's that. If God exists, God determines what's good or evil. And if that's the case, he will hold all his creatures accountable to him, because that was the very purpose for why they were made, to fear him and to obey him. That'll be all for today. Thanks for watching.